It's another cold winter night in Youngstown, Ohio. A big winter storm is brewing, and we're expecting the worst. With all that's been going on in the world, in our state, and in our humble little city, I got to thinking a lot about the history of Youngstown and how I fit into this history, and all the many experiences I've had here with some very interesting and compelling people. One of the people that made a very profound impact on me was an artist named Scott Pergande. May he rest in peace. He passed on to the great beyond. Well, probably coming up on a year now. Scott had a great influence on the Youngstown art community starting back in the early 80s. He leased a massive old wooden building downtown on the site of the current Youngstown Business Incubator. His building was an amazing, amazing place. It was 2 stories with a mezzanine, a big opening in the first floor ceiling, and it had a balcony around it. At one time it had been an old tailor shop. The ceilings were amazing. I believe the ceilings were, 12, 15 feet tall. The building was kind of narrow, so it had a strange dreamlike feel. Some of the rooms were not very wide, but had these 15-foot ceilings. And the way the rooms were interconnected created a strange kind of maze. It was, in certain spots, easy to get turned around in that place. Now, Scott was an antique aficionado. He ran an antique shop for many years in Ashtabula, Ohio, and he knew his stuff. Part of the way to get to Scott's heart and to get into the inner circle of people that hung out in his building was to bring him a nice antique. So many people brought him antiques and collectibles that he literally stuffed the space full, front to back, 2 stories, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. It was absolutely amazing. And when I say antiques, I mean beautiful old paintings, taxidermied animals, strange furniture. It went on and on. The peculiar things you would see in there. His place reminded me of a cross between the old Addams Family house and Dr. Seuss. And there were some nice things in there. It was a bit of an artist's paradise. It had a pool table, for example, and all these little hidden nooks for romance and whatever else. Now, Scott was known for throwing these lavish parties in this building. Sadly, there are virtually no photos that exist of this place. A lot of it had to do with, there were so many people involved in organized crime in those days that it was just very bad manners to bring a camera to a party like that. And if you did bring a camera, you had to be very careful, to say the least. Now, the food layout was amazing. Scott had built a table that he covered with tiles and bottle caps. The table was, I don't know, 15 feet long. It was beautiful. And it would be totally covered with all sorts of homemade food that people would bring. Now, his Christmas parties were the most lavish. As I said, there was a mezzanine. And so when you were on the first floor, you could look up through the ceiling to the second floor. It was a huge open area. Scott had these ideas, and nothing would stop him from bringing his vision to fruition. Every single year, he would bring in 2 massive Christmas trees. Trees that were 23, 25 foot tall, live trees. He would cut them down in the countryside somewhere, bring them in by truck, or I don't know how he got them there, and then fight these trees to get them into the building and erect these things. One of the greatest honors that could be bestowed upon a Youngstown artist would be to get invited to Scott's Christmas tree decorating party. Now we had to use massive ladders to decorate these trees, and Scott had a collection of antique toy stuffed animals and a variety of other antique toys. And we would climb these ladders and hang these big, peculiar stuffed animals from the tree limbs. And of course there were lights and tinsel and huge Christmas bulbs and various types of ornaments. It was dreamlike. It was amazing. It was as though you were in a forest. And of course we would drink and carry on during these Christmas parties. Or these Christmas tree decorating parties that would go on into the night. Then, of course, that would be followed up by the Christmas party. The Christmas parties would draw people from all over the place, not just from the Mahoning Valley, but from Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New York, Chicago. People would come in to see this crazy spectacle. It was truly a blessing, and Scott's building was one of the reasons I stayed in Youngstown. It was a true art mecca. I met so many wonderful people there. I had some of my first real romances there. The memories. Now, Scott also had Halloween parties. The Halloween parties were not less than or better than the Christmas parties. It was really like comparing apples and oranges. The Halloween parties were there was a bit of a dark quality to them. We would have a pumpkin carving party prior to the Halloween party. Scott would work out these deals for getting pumpkins somehow or another, and he would get 50, 100 pumpkins, maybe more. And it was up to us special invitees to come in and carve all these pumpkins. And there'd usually be about 10 of us, sometimes more. But we would work into the night carving pumpkin after pumpkin. It was actually exhausting. Plus we were drinking, and it's just amazing that nobody got sent to the hospital because of a slip of a knife. That wasn't all, though. Scott did some amazing things. Like, he wanted to give the feel of an autumn forest. So he had us go out and collect leaves from the neighborhoods, like huge garbage bags full of leaves. And we brought them in and we dumped them all over the floor, front to back. The whole building was filled with piles and piles of leaves, with all these beautiful antiques and artworks intermixed. Oh, the things we did. Scott would turn the lights down with all those antiques and everything. It created such a Halloween mood. It was almost a religious Halloween mood. These people would come in loaded to the hilt and just party it up. There were times when I got lost in that building, just got turned around in some kind of crazy fantasy world. You can only imagine. Now, as I said, Scott was an artist. He was a ceramicist. And he made very large-scale sculptures out of stoneware. Quite often the human figure. Life-size human figures out of stoneware, high-fire stoneware, which was extremely difficult to pull off. Now, Scott is often known for his masks. And I have a small one here, a very small one. Most of them were life-size, 3 or 4 times this size, with a lot of tentacles and horns, things like that. Scott won many awards, and he was a great inspiration to so many people. I think something important to remember about Scott is that he was gay at a time when it was very tough to be gay. And he was very out. And he was sympathetic yet disdainful of men who were not fully out of the closet. He was a warrior, and he went forth and set an example in this community about the importance of people like him and what they had to offer for the community. You know, as I said, it was really tough because in those days, AIDS was just ravaging the art community, and the general public was terrified of AIDS. At that time, too, there were several treatment centers for people with AIDS, and many people who suffered from that disease came to Youngstown for treatment. It was a tough time, and in many ways, Scott became a lightning rod for community fear, community prejudice, and Scott suffered many times as a result of his public image. Now, Scott's building is long gone. There were people in Youngstown, many with strong mafia ties, who hated Scott. And they hated the artist, and they hated the gay community. And they wanted us out of Youngstown. And they were doing everything they could to run Scott out of town. Scott suffered some beatings, for example. And eventually, they got so disgusted with Scott that they sent a backhoe and they dug up the water main that fed water into his building. So Scott went without water for a year or more because the city dug up his water line in an effort to drive him out of town. It was a struggle. It was a brutal struggle to maintain the arts in Youngstown, Ohio at that time. So we, as old school Youngstown artists, really did owe Scott a lot. And his presence in the downtown can still be felt today. His presence can still be felt throughout the art community. Now, you younger people may not know Scott, may not have heard of him, but it was because of pioneers like him, fearless warriors, that you have an art business here in Youngstown today. And I hope you can keep that in mind when you're dealing with people like me who are outspoken and don't take any crap, because we've all been through a lot. And a guy like Scott set an example for me about what it means to fight for the arts in Youngstown.